So some of you have obviously been to the irrigation basics that we did at Kent Town, what, a month or two ago? I'm guessing that most of you have got a basic understanding of irrigation install, putting like poly pipe onto fittings and clipping them up and all that jazz. The idea behind today's training is to talk a bit more about the reason, I guess, precipitation, the reason behind how we design irrigation systems, scheduling the amount of water that we're putting into soil profiles, and then we talk a little bit about, I guess, how much water soil profiles can take, and then why we do different things with adjusting of water. At the end, I'll go through troubleshooting, and we'll do some real life scheduling and changes. Obviously not on a controller, I haven't set anything up yet, but I might come to one of you and say, look, give me a situation that you've got out in the real world where there's a problem, and we'll work through it. So matched precipitation is the core, I guess, the starting point of this first half. So I'm assuming you guys have heard, who hasn't heard of the words matched precipitation used in irrigation context? Does that make sense to everyone? So MP rotators, I'm assuming everyone's used an MP rotator. The MP in MP rotator stands for matched precipitation. Matched precipitation is, in irrigation, basically simulating a rainfall event with irrigation, all in with consistent amounts of water over a large, or over whatever area you're watering, and no matter where it is, it's the same. So it's matched everywhere. So you're matching the precipitation. Now, the products like the MP rotator, the Rainbird R-Van, and the I think Rainbird 5000 have a matched precipitation nozzle. They can realistically be designed in any configuration, and they'll generally match. Obviously the 800 SR and the 3500s for the MPs won't necessarily match with the 1s, 2s and 3s. And then obviously you move to the R-Vans, which match with each other, and then you can use the 5000 matched precipitation nozzles in a situation with R-Vans, and you're going to get matched precipitation. Now the precipitation rates of all the different sprinklers vary depending on what you're using. So the Hunter MP rotator, in the 1s, 2s and 3s, you're going to deliver about 11 mil of water per hour per square meter, which is the lowest precipitation rate you'll get from a sprinkler. Then you move up to the R-Van, which is around 14 mil. And then if you jump right out to some of the gear drives and the traditional sprays, you know, the pop-up sprinklers that just spray a full jet fan of water, they're in the 20s to 40 mil an hour. So we're starting to get some really high flow and precipitation. So this information is quite important and quite relevant when we're working further down into the scheduling of the irrigation programming, because you need to understand what the sprinklers are delivering to enable you to work out how long you want to run them for and that kind of thing. Now, the application rates jump straight from the precipitation rates. That should have probably been written there. That's the application rate there. You can design the traditional spray systems in a matched precipitation configuration. The thing is, you just can't put, say, a 10A, a 12A and a 15A necessarily on the same line, because they're all putting out different amounts of water. But if you only use 10As and they were like a quarter and a half, you're getting that. So a quarter is half the amount of water as, sorry, 2/4 is the same as a half in that situation. When we design, say, an open space like a large oval, if we're using a sprinkler nozzle in a standard gear drive and the nozzles are 3 gallon per hour, we'll then put a 1.5 gallon per hour nozzle in the quart. So we'll have full circles at 3, and then we'll do half circles at 1.5, because obviously a sprinkler is going back and forth twice as often as a full circle. So then we have to allow for that to make sure that we're getting matched precipitation. So you've got your oval, and then all the sprinklers that we design around the outside are only going like that. So we run them on one line. And then obviously you've got the ones down the middle, they'll go on a different line, so that we know that we can get the matched precipitation. So we'll water for less time because they're covering double the area in the same amount of time. So all of that ensures that you're getting that matched precipitation. I used the example yesterday of someone dragging a sprinkler around a lawn, you know, like, I guess when I was a kid, you just have those round metal sprinklers on a hose, and you just kind of leave it out there until someone remembers and then drag it to something else. That's the complete opposite of matched precipitation. That's just flooding certain areas And by doing that, you might have a whole lot of water there and then a whole lot of water there, but then they're not joining across there. So the idea is that you get your application rate being that, but accurately, by using either good irrigation design or using products that are match precipitation, like the MP rotators. So the same concept applies for drip irrigation as well. So if you're looking to irrigate a garden bed and you're running drip line, as you would probably see in more densely planted areas, where you've got a spacing between the drip line of a predetermined amount, so it might be 300 or 400 or 500, and then you've got a spacing between the drippers, also predetermined, obviously whatever comes on the roll. This can be 0.3 by 0.3, 0.4 by 0.4, 0.3 by 0.4, it depends on the spec. Any of you guys do commercial work, so obviously in a lot of those cases you're going to get a specification and that's it. You're working to that, you don't step outside those lines. Residentially it's going to come, well, you do a lot of commercial work as well, but residentially it's probably going to be left in the hands of you to make the right decisions around this. Now, recently, there's a council north of here that's had specifications of 0.3, 0.3 and 1.6 litres an hour. The amount of, the actual the application rate or the precipitation is somewhere in the vicinity of 25 or 30 mil an hour when you're getting that close to it together. And you get to a situation where the soil can't actually handle that much water. So it's important for you guys to think about your soil profile and your soil types when you're actually, if you're choosing the spacing. But even in situations where it's specified for you, it's often only specified because it's been stolen from a document that was stolen from another document that was stolen from another document 20 years ago, and they haven't changed the document. So we're probably more likely to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right, we think we could change it. Most people just go with it, and then they wonder why there's flooding or there's squelching or whatever, because no one's, a lot through that whole journey, no one's actually stopped and said, hang on, is this right? Like, it's just because they used to do it. So if you're gridding like this, you will have the ability to actually calculate your application rate, which might be 17 mil an hour, it might be 25 mil an hour, and then that obviously helps you when you're trying to work out your application further. If you just snake your drip tube around and then there's just a dripper wherever, and there's a tree there, and there's a tree there, and there's a tree there, the scheduling is going to be different. We can't. There's just this tunnel of water. There's no. You'd probably move down the path of looking at it and going, well, there's two drippers either side of that tree, and they both put out 1.6 litres an hour. That tree needs 10 litres a week, so we're just going to water. We'll reverse engineer that to make sure that we're watering for the right amount of time. The application rates for, I'll try and give you a general rate or a general idea. So each product has its own application rate. We've talked about that before, with the MP rotator being 11, the RVAM being 14 and that kind of thing. When we move into infiltration rates, it's not all soils are the same, obviously, and some soils can handle more water per minute than others. So this is something that you've probably not moved into yet, and you're not, I mean, you guys maybe, I don't know if you've started thinking about, but if you've got a soil type like a clay loam, it might be capable of taking 5 to 10 mil an hour. And then you've got a product that puts out 11 mil an hour, or a product that puts out 14 mil an hour, or a product that puts out 20 or 30 mil an hour. The soil type profile can't actually physically take all that water in the time that you're trying to deliver it. So that's when we need to start thinking about how regularly you're watering and whether or not you're splitting up your waterings. That's one of the great things about the MP rotator, and obviously drip tube designed at kind of 0.4, 0.4. I think 0.4, 0.4, 1.6 gets close to an MP rotator. So it's not something that I would ever recommend, but if you ever got stuck and you had to run your garden and your lawn on the same line, if you're in like a situation where there's already a concrete path there and you've only got one line and the client's happy to move with it, an MP with a 0.4, 0.4, 1.6 is probably as close as you're going to get. It's obviously not a good situation that you're watering your lawn every time you're watering your garden, because they have different demands, but it might be one of those close enough is good enough situations. So you'll have your soil type. So for this situation, we've got a clay loam can take 5 to 10 mil an hour. The then holding capacity of that soil might be, say, 6 to 10 mil total. So obviously you can't physically get any more water in there. So if you look at like a clay particle versus a sand particle, it's the sand that's just going to go straight through and it will keep going, and or the clay might hold it. So we talked about this yesterday. I'll actually use the same example. If you get a rainwater, or if you get a soil profile that can hold 25 mil of water, you can obviously water into that at, say, 11 mil an hour, and it's going to take, and this is obviously, remember, we're dealing with a lot of variables. Obviously the soil, what's it like, there could be rocks, there could be sand, there could be tree roots. It's more like biology than physics, but say that you can get 2.2 lots of hours in there, you can fill that up over the period of, what is that, 100, say 200 minutes, but you can't do that as one consistent 200-minute run, otherwise it's just going to sit on the top of the surface, and that's when you get your puddling or your planing. I'll jump past, so all of this is kind of the same thing. So if you are trying to work out the right amount of water to put on for a lawn, the water is going to evaporate at a certain amount per day. So you might have a 2 mil or a 3 mil or a 6 mil evapotranspiration. So that's the amount of water that the lawn's using over a day. So this would be something that you would work. It's hard when it's a job that you're not going back to, because obviously you guys can't have, but if you're doing maintenance on a job and you can start to get a real-time feeling for what's going on, you don't want to let this go too low. So usually a soil profile will come out of winter relatively wet, and then as the weather gets warmer and the plant becomes less dormant, it starts using the water. So it might use 2 or 3 mil of water every day. We don't want to be putting 2 or 3 mil of water in an irrigation event on every day. It's not enough water for it to get into the soil structure. The idea is that we want to let that deplete to a certain level, ideally into that 1/3 down or 1/2 down, and then re-water. So you would put on, say, you'd let that drop by 10 mil. So if you like, and this data is all available, and this is what smart controllers do. You have your ET that you've used each day, and it might be 2, 2, 2, and then after 4 days you've kind of lost 8 mil. Then you want to reapply that 8 mil. Now we know we can do that because in a certain amount of time, because the sprinklers put out X amount of mil of water per hour. Then you just calculate how many hours you need to water for, but you need to take into consideration that the soil might not be able to take it all back to back. So that's when we get into this cycle and soak. So you might want to put out 11 mil of water or 8 mil of water to get this back up to being completely like a full sponge. You might want to break that into two watering events, so 2 4 mil watering events. So that's about 20 minutes. So you do a 20-minute, you let it soak in, and then do another 20-minute. This is going to stop you from, when you walk out and you kind of step on the lawn and it's squelchy, that's when you're going to start wasting water. If it's on any slope at all, the water's just going to plane off and it's going to land down at the lowest point, and that's when you're going to get your fungal issues at night and every other, damage. If it's a turf, it's going to be growing inconsistently, it's going to be damaged, it might get fungal issues. So I think the best thing to probably do is to do a water budgeting example over here and drag all that information together to give you a bit of a real world example. So yesterday I used a lawn, a garden and some trees. So commercially you guys would see this a lot where, or maybe on a streetscape situation where the tree lines actually run independent to the gardens. Obviously they let the trees establish, usually turn those tree lines off later, and then obviously the gardens are maybe a little bit less native and need to be watered more regularly. So if that was a residential system, we're going to have a lawn, say with MP rotators in each corner, a garden with drip tube running at a predetermined spacing, And then you might have your tree line with large trees. That's a tree. Actually looks like a railway crossing, doesn't it? It's probably not. That's a tree. So you might have irrigation coming on either side of that. And then you might think we've got large pots. We're going to put shrubblers. You guys have used shrubblers. So pressure compensating shrubblers, they do 24 litres an hour each 24 litres per hour each. So you might be getting 48 litres here, here, here. So in this situation, we're going to water for an amount of time because there's no, you could work out how many mil you're putting out, but it doesn't really mean anything because it's not over an actual area like that. So we might say we want to water that for 1 hour a week while they're establishing. The MP rotators are going to deliver 11 mil per hour, and we'll say 20 mil an hour for this, just for the ease of this. So that's how much water the actual products that you've installed will deliver. You now need to work out how much water the actual area that you're looking to water needs, right? So you would have seen in irrigation controllers, you've got program A, program B, program C, program D, 4 start times, however many stations, and it gets quite complicated. Obviously with the introduction of Wi-Fi controllers, it's made it a lot easier for you to sit down in a more comfortable situation than a shed with spider webs and darkness, and be able to sit down and plan your scheduling. If you can plan your scheduling before you get to the point where you need to do your scheduling, you're going to do a better job. Obviously with Wi-Fi controllers, if you do make a mistake, it's something that you can easily fix from back at the office or your mobile phone. Is anyone actually using or managing their client irrigation from Wi-Fi controllers at the moment? You guys don't do that? So we had a guy yesterday who has a HydroWise contractor plan. So he'll set up for his client and become the parental account as such, and then give his client child access. I think they used to call that master and slave, but I don't think you're allowed to call it that anymore. And then the clients can obviously make their own changes, and it keeps records, and they have pins so they can adjust. So if they make a change, there's a record of if your client's made a change, so that when your client rings you and says, my irrigation's broken and you're an idiot, you're like, well, actually, no, you've put in changes. So if you can get this set up for them, it's going to set you apart from the rest of, well, from your competitors. Because in a room here, there's no one's doing it. The room yesterday, we had more people there and there was only one person doing it. So I'm probably getting distracted, which I do, so I apologize. So for this, we're gonna have the lawn, the garden with a D, and the trees. So this is where your programs A, B, C, and D come in. So we might put your lawn on program A and your garden on program B and your trees on program C. And then you set those programs and then you allocate the stations to the programs. Now, you want to try and water your lawn infrequently and deeper. Now, we've obviously talked about the fact that sometimes your lawn's not going to be able to take the amount of water that you want to deliver in the time. For the sake of this, we'll work on it being a sandy loam. A sandy loam's going to be able to definitely take MP rotators. A sandy loam will take, 10 to 15 mil an hour? 10 to 18 mil an hour. I had Matt helping me yesterday. He's a lot smarter than me, so as much as I've done this once before, yesterday's was probably better, so I apologise. But I'll try and be as good as he was yesterday. So with the lawn, we know that it can take 10 to 18 mil, so we don't need to try and cycle and soak that one. So we can say that we're going to water that 2 times a week at 1 hour. Well, that gets us to 22 mil, right? So that's not enough. We need 25 mil for a lawn. This is an industry standard application rate for lawn, 25 mil per week in a normal, not in the blistering hot summer, but a normal Adelaide spring, I guess. So we really need to be doing, if we did 3 waterings we would be doing, say, 3 45-minute waterings in 1 week. And then the garden, say we wanted to get the same amount of water, we might want to water the garden just once a week. So we're going to set that to water 1 time per week. So who can tell me how long for at 20 mil? If we want 25 mil, say, what's 5 over 1.1 hours or something? 1.15 hours? Hour and 15, we'll say, so 75 minutes for this one. That's probably wrong. I'm gonna get some shit on YouTube about that one, no doubt. And then the trees, we just know we need to do an hour a week. So with the smart controller, we can set all of that information up in the controller, but then we can teach the controller the parameters that it needs to understand for it to change that. So if the controller said, it would know that it's referring to weather stations in the local area, it's referring to the average rainfall and the average, like it actually references weather data for your local area back 30 years, does an average, and then there's an algorithm where it calculates that combined with the actual real time that's happening on your 4 or 5 weather stations that you're referencing, and then it can make adjustments to these schedules. So that's your seasonal adjust. The traditional seasonal adjust, has anyone got any questions about this? That makes sense? So we've gone from, we know how much water our product puts out per hour in mil. We know how much the soil and the garden needs per week in mil. We know how much the soil can take per hour in mil, and then we use all of that data to calculate how many minutes per week each of those areas need to get their total required mil, and then we set it up. Now, the real life situation is going to be that you need to also watch this. Obviously, it's great to be able to set it up, and there's going to be microclimates in your gardens where there's a tree over a lawn and it changes the way the lawn reacts, and you might need to put more water on that station or less water on that station, or increase your watering. So this is a bit of a set it but don't forget it. So that's in spring. Now, as we move into summer, we might go, well, hang on, this water was fine when our ET was 2 mil a day, but we're losing 8 mil or 10 mil a day in the peak of summer. What are we going to do? Now, you could increase the watering times, or you can up your run time, depending on how you guys want to do it. Now, obviously, if the soil profile is such that it can't take a lot of water because the root zones, so you might have a situation where the lawn's quite young and the roots are only, 50 or 60 mil down. There's no point going so deep that the water's gone past those roots because it's not doing anything. So this will be a case that you guys will start going, oh, hang on, it's a 1-year-old lawn, or we've actually dug down and checked the root zone using a shovel or a plugger. Let's do 5 times a week for 45 minutes or 5 times a week for 35 minutes rather than increasing that 45 to an hour and a quarter and getting that deep root watering, yeah? So that can either occur using seasonal adjust that is an automatic change in the controller, or if you're going back to the kind of non-Wi-Fi controllers, you can go into the seasonal adjust function and just press it up to 120 or 140% or down to 80 or 70 or 60% in winter, and these times will move up and down. Yeah? So that's water budgeting and seasonal adjust. When there's one thing that I haven't covered around that will help you potentially when you're dealing with the client at the quoting stage, is once you understand how many mil of water you're delivering per square meter of area, you can actually calculate the total demand that your client might be, I guess, able to expect per annum or per season or per month, so that they can get a better understanding of how much water they're going to be buying. A lot of times we'll have clients that want to quote on a rainwater tank, and they'll get a 5,000 litre rainwater tank quoted, and the client has this misconception that that's going to water their garden for the whole year. And they've just spent $5,000, they've got a tank and a pump, and they never have to buy water ever again. And the reality is, an average lawn at 25 mil a week, that tank might last 3 watering events and it's empty. So if we have a wet spring, that's fine. But if you have 6 months where it doesn't rain, it's wasting. It's almost not worth putting it in. A lot of the rainwater tank installations that we see, and not where, like obviously regional areas where you can put 100,000 in, it's a lot different, but you put 1,000 to 5,000 litres in residentially, it's because it makes you feel good, not because it's saving you money, because the actual infrastructure cost is so far, it's going to take you 10 or 20 years to get any return, unless water prices go to $15 or $20 a kilolitre, which I don't know what's going to happen there. So if you can give the client an idea of how much they're going to be spending on irrigation, it will help them obviously make an informed decision. It's further going to separate you from the other tradesperson that's come out and quoted it and just gone, I don't know, like just stick some sprinklers in and like just turn them on when it looks dry like that. This gives you so much more power to go out there and separate you from the rest of the trades, and then be able to, I guess, instill confidence into these clients that you do know what you're talking about and that there's data to back it up. So all the products that we stock, that the Rainbird and the Hunter and the Net FM and the Toro drip tube, they've all got pressure compensation, pressure regulation, or they've matched precipitation, or they've got wind tunnel data where they've tested the sprinklers in simulated situations, so that you come back with the amount of water per minute or the amount of mil per hour that's going to deliver, and therefore it's easy for us to design a system, but it gives you ammunition to go, well, we've actually done the calculations and this is how much you're going to need. If that's a concern to you, maybe we need to reduce the size of the lawn, or maybe we need to use a different variety of lawn. Obviously a ryegrass or a fescue is going to use a lot more water per week than a kikuyu or a cooch, depending on where it is. So that takes me into pressure compensation. One of the biggest, or one of the most common questions that we get around the MP rotator is I can't adjust it. So all of this is great, provided the sprinklers are delivering the amount of water that they were meant to deliver. So we've used those charts, like I said. The chart says that an MP rotator should throw 5.1 meters at a certain amount of flow, and you're finding that it's not. It's either throwing too far, you can't adjust it. In most cases, it's because the pressure coming into the sprinkler head is incorrect. So you're not going to be able to adjust an MP rotator very easily if the pressure's too high. An R-van, you might find, is a lot easier to adjust. I don't know if you had experience with both. You know what I'm talking about? What have you used?
We just use MP rotors.
Flat out MP rotators, same? No? Use the R-vans at all? No? Yep. You can adjust them with your hand. Yep. So the MP rotator was the original match precipitation nozzle. It was owned by Nelson, I think, or Walla Walla, and they sold it to Hunter, and then Hunter took it and ran with it and made it a global thing. Rainbird played chasey against that for a decade or more and came out with the R-van, which is the same concept. It's a finger spray. It's a slightly higher precipitation. So like I said, it's 11 for the MP, and then the R-van's somewhere around 14 or 16. I probably shouldn't write R-van in orange, I should have it in green, but so I think I'm going to write 15. That's not the correct number, but it'll just give you some indication. So it's slightly higher mil. The good thing with the R-van is you don't need a tool to adjust the distance that it throws or the angle. So I don't know, are you ever adjusting your MPs by hand?
The angle, yeah.
Yep, so you just grab the silver and just stick a screwdriver in it. The actual R-vans have it's a pretty easy to grip ring in the head, and you can turn, like an R-van that's throwing 4 or 5 meters, you can turn it down to that. Like you can watch it go right down. Now, obviously at 600 mil, it's not doing anything that it should be from a precipitation matching standpoint, but it just shows you how much you can adjust it. Now, if you don't have the correct pressure going into either of them, they're not going to perform how they're meant to. The sprinklers, when they do their wind tunnel tests, they're setting them at 200 or 300 kilopascals. They're probably not that high. I know about that. And that's then giving them a certain result. If you're pushing 500 or 600 kPa into the bottom of one of these heads, they're not going to perform how they're meant to. Now, there's a few ways you can deal with that. If it's an existing system and you can't get a pressure reducer in the valve box, you can buy pressure reducers that screw onto the top of a valve. So Hunter call theirs an AccuSync. These guys do Rainbird. Do you remember Duffy? He doesn't even listen. He's just standing behind the camera. T-Boss? T-Boss? No, that's not it. Anyway, you can unscrew the coil and you can fit a device between the coil and the valve, and it will pressure reduce the valve. Have you used them?
No, we're working on high pressure to begin with, so we have a brass pressure.
Way back. So for those that didn't hear, you can actually pressure reduce at the start of a system. So if it was a residential property, at the meter you could put a brass pressure reducer in and it reduces the whole house. All new houses have got a 500 kPa pressure reducer in them now anyway, which kind of messes with irrigation because it's kind of low enough that it's not going to cause damage, but it's not high enough that you can reduce well. So pressure reducers need enough pressure coming in for them to actually do something. It's almost the 500. In most new houses, you could almost get away with not putting any pressure reducers in after that, because the 500 has pressure loss then through the ball valve, the solenoid valves, the manifold. Like you might lose 50 or 80 kPa through all of that infrastructure, and now you're at 420. You go through a bit of polypipe, you're at 400. The sprinklers need 320 or 280. We're kind of getting close. If you try to then stick a pressure reducer in that infrastructure, it might not work as well as it's meant to. So you could put one at the start of the system, you could put one immediately after the valve, which is probably what most of you have done. You've screw a pressure reducer straight in here, and then that goes and does its thing. Or you can actually get pressure regulating bodies in sprinklers now. So the sprinkler itself has the thing pop up. In that shaft, it has a pressure regulator, which is micro pressure regulating the whole system. So if you think about, you might have a terraced lawn where it's 2 meters difference. That 2 meters is affected by gravity. So 2 meters further down is delivering 20 kPa more pressure to the sprinklers than the sprinklers above it. So every meter of elevation is 10 kPa, that's right. Is that right? Yeah. So 1 meter is 10 kPa, I'm pretty sure. Another one, I'm going to get that fact checked. You fact check that for me, Duff? But basically, if you have a rainwater tank at the top of a hill, coming down the hill, if it's high enough, it'll operate sprinklers. So in that situation, a rainwater tank would need to be 30 meters above the sprinklers, and you could just open the ball valve and the sprinklers will pop up and turn. So if you have a garden system like that, the lower they are, the more pressure they're getting. So then you might look at getting pressure regulating bodies, which each of the shafts have a 30 or a 40 or a 45 PSI pressure regulator in the actual sprinkler. Sadly, all of these nozzles have different requirements. So the SR800s are different to the MP1s, 2s and 3s. So I guess it's just important for you to know that, so that if you're using us or an irrigation shop to do your irrigation designs, you just give them the best amount of information that you can, and then they'll design that in. And then you might ask for those bodies. They're a lot more expensive than a standard body, and it might not be something that you need, but if you want to go to the absolute, like if you want to spend, not if you want to spend the most money, but if you want to buy the best quality irrigation system money can buy, that's where you're going to probably go with a Hunter Hydro Wise, a flow sensor, pressure regulating bodies. Like every single piece is in there, and then there's no reason why you have no excuse not to have the most efficient irrigation system that's available on Earth. Right, so pressure compensation or pressure regulation's been part of the drip tube environment for 30 or 40 years. Every roller drip tube that you're sitting next to now is pressure compensated. We do not stock non-pressure compensated drip tube. It ensures that, again, in those situations where you've got sloping areas, that the plant that's a meter below that plant gets delivered the same amount of water as the plant up there. And it only works to a certain elevation. So once we start getting dramatic elevations, so if we had plants on the top of the pallet racking, so 4 meters up, and plants down here, the actual head again comes into play. So we're actually getting different pressures because we're so far apart. When we do that, we would design the drip tube. Say this was a hill, we'd have drip tube running across the hill. The bottom 2 meters would be on their own station and the top 2 meters would be on the next station, so that they're not impacting each other, especially when you turn them off, because every bit of water that's in the top 2 will come out the bottom 1 and then you'll get flooding. So pressure compensation is important to understand that all of these, I guess that the bottom line is every product that we sell that delivers water that's a professional brand has a predetermined amount of pressure that it works best at. It's your responsibility as an installer to ensure that you do the best you can to deliver that pressure so that the dripper or the sprinkler is throwing what it's meant to throw. On the hilly surfaces areas, check valves in sprinklers is something that not a lot of people are aware of. I don't know if you guys have seen it, where you turn a system off and the sprinkler at the bottom just keeps gurgling out until all the water's gone. So if you've got a piece of pipe that's 10 meters long and there's 3 or 4 sprinklers on it, all the water that's in that pipe, obviously water's going to find its own level, it wants to come out. Now, a standard sprinkler will just allow it out, it just seeps out. There is a product called a check valve that you can retrofit to Hunter Pro sprays. You can't retrofit Rainbird, so you'd have to buy one with a rubber. It's basically, it pushes into the filter. So if you bought a Hunter Pro spray, which you guys would have all used, they're the ones that have got the grey nozzle that snaps off, that has the flushing nozzle. You screw that out, you stick this rubber into the filter. It sits a bit more proud than it would have traditionally, but when it closes, the rubber seals off the bottom of that sprinkler, so all the water that's sitting above it stays in the pipe. So next time you turn it on, it's pre-charged and off it goes. If you don't have that, you're getting that same situation I was talking about where water leaks out at the bottom point, and then you've got fungal issues, or it's just shit. Like, you've got flooding there, and the lawn just won't be the same. So that's a very small piece of this session. I just wanted to make sure it was included because I think it's really important to know what's available. I think a lot of times as a tradesperson, you can come into a shop and just get into the habit of buying the same thing over and over again obviously everyone's stupidly busy now more than ever. No one's got the time to sit down, and this is great that you guys have made time to do this, but in most cases no one has that time to go, oh, tell us about the latest product and what's changed in the irrigation. And the irrigation industry doesn't change that much. Like, the most exciting thing in the last 10 years is Wi-Fi controllers, really. There's not much else. I mean, R vans and MP rotators are kind of 20 years old. Gear drive sprinklers are 40 years old. Like, nothing's changed. Like, this stuff's been the same forever. But there are little things that happen along the way, or there's things that have always been around that no one tells you about. South Australia is probably super guilty for not using articulated risers when you start comparing us to other states like Western Australia. So an articulated riser is you'd use them commercially, obviously, they'd be specified, but residentially no one uses them. So it's oh man, that's not going to work. So it's basically, I don't have a lot of stock here because we've only just moved here, but it's just a bunch of threaded elbows. There's 2 elbows there. The sprinkler sits on top of that, and that's a threaded riser, and that moves up and down. So have you guys seen these? No, you haven't seen them before? So you'd have your pipe there. Commercially, we might have one here. So the idea is that if someone drives over that sprinkler, the riser, there's 2 elbows there and 1 there, and they sit in so that might be PVC, and if they drive over that sprinkler, it takes the load of the car rather than snapping or breaking the sprinkler. It can sometimes push the riser down, or if you need to adjust the sprinkler height up or down because it's been top dressed, you just dig around there and lift that up a little bit, rather than trying to unscrew the whole sprinkler and put those male-female adapters and just keep making the sprinkler higher and higher. I'll grab one before, I'm sure we have one here. I'll grab one and show you guys before you go. So these are the things that have been around forever, but people assume that you know about them, but you don't, because unless you're getting exposed to them because you're doing that kind of work and it's specified, it's very rare for people to use them. You don't use them?
With the clay soils and stuff.
Yeah, because you don't want to dig that far, yeah. So commercially, obviously, most of the time the sub-mains are getting dug that deep anyway that you have to use them because you can't get the sprinkler down there. All right. So I want to talk about cable and pipe sizing, and then we might have a quick break, and then we'll go through all the troubleshooting stuff. So the only piece of paper that we've given you today is around cable sizing. Again, this is something that you don't need to remember and you don't need to be able to calculate yourselves. Most of the things that I'm talking about today, the data sheets are available on the internet, and it's like everywhere. You just Google cable, like voltage drop diagram, and you'll find that. You look for pressure loss diagrams and you'll find that. you look for MP rotator charts, it's all there. YouTube's an unbelievably valuable tool that you've got in your pocket all the time around how to reset a controller, how to reset a valve, but it's probably not as common for you to go, what is the voltage drop of 0.5 cable over this amount of meters? Now, if you have a look at the second paragraph there, there's, what is it? The 0.5 and the 0.5, which is the top line of the top column, and there's about 159 meters or something.
Yeah, 153.
So you can use that chart, you work out how far you need to run your cable. So this is a chart that we use when we're designing commercial irrigation systems to work out how far a certain gauge cable can run before the solenoid valve's not receiving enough voltage to open. So the way a solenoid valve works is by sending a pulse through to these two cables. It's an alternating current. I'm talking 24 volt solenoid valve AC. It's an alternating current, so it doesn't matter obviously the polarity. You wire that up, it sends electricity through to there, a magnet, electromagnet lifts the pin and it opens the valve. Now, if you can't get enough electricity to these valves to do that, they're not going to work. Now, the wiring chart there says 153 meters. We wouldn't design out that far. Residentially, it's very uncommon for us to see a system that's 100 meters anyway. Obviously, you're probably a unique case because you're doing jobs.
Yeah, if because it's 100 meter roll.
Yeah, you just go to 100.
Meters, I just go
Yep. And this is exactly the conversation we had with a few guys yesterday. They said if it's above 100 meters, they won't use 0.5. You probably could. You can buy 500 meter rolls of 0.5. The problem is no one holds them. Like, we don't have any. And you wouldn't buy a 500 meter roll, cut 120 off and then save the rest of the roll for the next job. You go to 1.5. It's interesting to note 1 mil is really rarely used. Like, we design 1 mil a fair bit because it fits so many. Like, if you ever look at the 1 mil by 1 mil, it goes so far. But it's just been, again, one of those things that irrigation design firms for the last 20 or 30 years have just used 1.5. I would theorize that it's because it's easy and it means they don't have to change a block template in their CAD software, so they just spit out the same shit and just hope that no one notices. The good thing is irrigation shops sell more cable and make more money, but it's not, it's over-engineered in some cases. But the idea is if you're doing a commercial project and it's not a decoder system, it's going to be a multi-core system. I'll talk about the differences in them in a sec. This is going to be bonus information that wasn't in yesterday's. If you're using a multi-core system, which is what this cable's for, you just need to make sure that you're running the right gauge cable so that you're still getting the amount of voltage that you require at the end that you need to open the solenoid valve. So what's the biggest, like a 0.4, 2.5. So we use 4 mil common on commercial projects and 2.5 mil, so what's that, 1,000 meters? Yeah, 980 meters. So it's funny though, like that 980 meters isn't that far in a commercial situation. I mean, golf courses, we're getting kind of like 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers or whatever it is. So when we go above and beyond that kilometer range, that's when we start moving into decoder. The situation's usually so big that there's so many valves anyway, because there's not enough flow. Obviously each valve can only have 80 or 100 liters a minute, and you've got this need to water with, 100 valves. 100 valves of multi-core is 101 cables. 100 valves of decoder is 2 cables. So has anyone used Decoder Systems? You haven't used them?
I've had to
Fixing them. I'll talk about them just so you're across them. I don't think you're going to see them residentially. Hunter have just released a new kind of residential decoder. So the best way to explain it for someone that's never heard it before is it's a 2-wire solenoid system instead of a multi-core solenoid system. So the way multi-core systems work is it sends 24 volt alternating current through a common and an active. The active is the color cable. So you've got brown, red, orange, pink, blue, blah, blah, blah. Those common cables are wired up to 1 valve each. So when you have electricity come through station 1, it's got the black cables getting part of the circuit going to one of these, and then the pink or the white or whatever you've chosen for station 1 is going through the other, creates a circuit. It's alternating current, so it's vibrating, lifting the pin. A decoder system has a computer, which is the controller. Each decoder is like a plastic cylinder the size of a toilet roll with a couple of copper rods coming out of it and some cables. Those cables get wired to a 2-wire path. The 2-wire goes everywhere. So it's like Ethernet cable, like a blue internet cable, but there's only 2 pieces of like pretty thick copper in there, like 3 mil or whatever. We've actually got some here, I can show you after. The controller sends out a signal, and it will be it's like an email or a text. It'll be a 5-digit code, 90210 for those of you that have, no, that doesn't mean, that means something for you, I know it does. Sends out a 5-digit code, the decoder goes, oh, that's me, and it opens the valve. So it sends the pulse to the valve, and I think it tells it to close as well. It doesn't just stay open the whole time. So the advantage of that is you only need to run 2 cables. You can run 2 cables to, in most cases, up to 200 decoders around the whole area. It sends the signal out to the decoder to open. You can actually have 4 or 5 or 4, or I think it's 4 up to 6 with some of them. They can all be open at the same time. So with a golf course, you're getting this, you know that you can deliver 25, you need 25 mil across the whole golf course. You've got 2 different pump systems. So you can actually have 2 valves open at the same time. Or you might find that one of your valves only has 2 sprinklers, and you can put it on with the other valve that's got 4 sprinklers, because most of the other valves have 6 sprinklers, and you load share to try and make sure that your watering windows are small. Because on a golf course or in a public space or in a new subdivision, it's not the same as this residentially, where you can just have the sprinkler come on for an hour every 3 days. They've got to water 10,000 square meters or whatever it is, or what's a golf course like, 6 hectares, or I don't even know. But they and they can't water when people are playing golf, so they can only water at night. They can't water at certain times of night if it's too cold, because then they're going to have issues with disease. So they have to work out the exact right amount of, the amount of minutes of water that they've got, and then they have to work out when they can do that. So Decoder Systems are great for that. One of the big downfalls of Decoder Systems is they're a massive lightning rod. So when you're installing a Decoder system, anything that gets hit on the system with lightning, the whole thing can not explode, but it'll burn out. So a decoder itself, the little toilet roll thingies, they're worth about $100 each. You have one of them hit by lightning, you're getting a new decoder. So and this is in manufacturer's specifications, every certain distance, and I think it's at every end and every corner, and then say every 500 meters or a kilometer, they put a brass rod that's probably 1.5 meters long, they smack that into the ground, they connect it to the system, so that when that system gets hit by lightning, it sends that through into the ground and grounds the system and doesn't blow up the decoder. So handy to know. You're probably never going to come across it, but I figured while we're here, we'll talk about it. If you don't have the right size cable, you're not going to deliver the right amount of electricity to the solenoid valve, and it's not going to work. It's that simple. We have commercial situations where the commercial contractor may have won the job at a super, super low price, and they're looking for savings. This is not somewhere you can save money. So you can't take 1.5 mil to 0.5 mil and hope for the best. You can't have 0.5 mil run for the first 100 meters and then join it to 1.5 mil and hope for the best, because the builder won't see it. Like, you're going to have trouble. So you might be able to put 1 mil in where 1.5 mil was meant to be there, because an irrigation design firm over-engineered it, but you're going to get caught. So as important with cable, as it is important with cable, pipe sizing is super important. So as you will lose voltage through cable, you will lose pressure through pipe. We obviously do all the calculations for you on a commercial system when we're doing irrigation design, as do the other irrigation design firms across the state. Residentially, it's not as full on. Most of the time, if you're putting 25 mil poly in, you're going to be fine from a pressure loss standpoint. You need to remember, there's a couple of things to remember there: pressure loss and velocity. So when we design an irrigation system, we try to keep the velocity of the water moving through the pipe below 2 meters per second. If it's going too fast, it'll hammer, and you'll hear the screeching and the hammering. So the way we reduce that is by making the pipe bigger, so that we can get more water, I guess more liters per minute in the time, so lower velocity. I think that's right. If you try to run, say 40 liters a minute through 13 mil, you're going to have trouble. So 25 mil residential is always going to be fine. 19 mil, you've probably done MP rotator systems hundreds of times off 19 mil with no issues. If you start going above that 30 liters a minute, it's worth looking at 25 mil. If you're doing drip systems like this, where you're actually punching the header pipe, the 25 mil is going to be better anyway, because it's easier. You're not getting that rounding where it's hard to get a clean punch, but it's also important to remember that there's a velocity there. We lose pressure through everything so from the start of a system, through the backflow, through the master valve, through the ball valve, every elbow, the sides of the pipe, the water rubbing on the pipe as it moves through it, going into a manifold, the elbows in the manifold, through the valves, everything that happens loses pressure. When we design an irrigation system, we know, where's my irrigation system? These sprinklers need 280 kPa at the sprinkler, right? So we talked before about a 500 kPa pressure reducer at the start of the house. And then I was saying, you know, if it loses 50 here, 50 there, 50 there, if you get to the point where this actually only was 320 and you needed 280 here, if it goes through a non-return valve will generally shave 50 kPa off. So even your 40 mil ones commercially, that you'll lose about 50 kPa. A solenoid valve might take 20 kPa of pressure. Pressure and flow are different, and we've talked about this in basics of irrigation. If you lose too much pressure through all of the infrastructure, they won't pop up. And if you lose too much pressure to a point where there's not 100 kPa, they won't drip. So when we design these systems, we are working that out. And commercially, you'll see it on a plan, like the system has been designed at 80 litres a minute at 500 kPa. As a contractor, it should be written on the plan. If it's not, I recommend that you test your water pressure and flow before starting an irrigation system. Even if it's been tested by you 2 months earlier at the quote stage, you get a design by us, you go out and start the system, check that nothing's changed. There is nothing worse than putting all this in and then it doesn't work, and then you'd start walking around, you're like, what's going on? They're like, oh yeah, SA Water dropped the pressure the other day because the shower head kept blowing off. That's your fault. As much as it's not, it's going to be your problem. So keep in mind the pressure loss. Test it before you start. Have you got a tester? Do you guys test? You got a pressure tester? No. So if you did a system at the moment, I mean, obviously Ron would just roll in and buy the shit and you put it in the ground and that's it. And I'm not saying you need to buy one, but having a pressure tester or a flow test in your vehicle is going to save you some trouble. Even if it's like a company of your size, to have one in the company, it's going to save you some trouble. Especially, like, you think about the commercial sites you do. When we do a pressure versus flow test commercially, I use a wheelie bin because there's so much water coming out. We're squirting like 100 litres a minute into a wheelie bin. You're just not going to do a bucket test like you've seen. So having that would be helpful. It gives you further security so that if you finish that job, like say, especially commercially, you finish the whole job and it doesn't work and they're like, well, what happened? You're like, well, here's a video of us doing a pressure versus flow test before we started. Here's photos of all the pipes in the ground. You can see the sprinklers. Something's changed, and they're like, no, it hasn't. And you've just got this evidence that you prepared it all. It sucks that the world's got to a place where you have to behave like that. But I've seen it so many times over the last 15 years. Someone else will throw you under the bus because that's the world we live in. They don't want to take responsibility for it. If you can protect yourselves, it's like the UFC. Protect yourselves at all times. Yep, everyone gets that reference. All right, cool. The troubleshooting is something that I think is probably more real life, and it's something that you're going, like this, all this scheduling that we talked about is great, but in a lot of situations it's not going to be done at the ground level. It's going to be done by the supervisor, or it's predetermined by the design or whatever. So I wanted to make sure that we send you home. It was really important to me that the training was valuable and that you actually went away with some stuff that you could use day to day. Now obviously you'll do different things and I don't understand the day to day. You know how to repair a pipe by cutting a hole and putting a joiner in and that kind of thing. But obviously solenoid valves, sprinklers and controllers are generally where we have the most questions, and probably solenoid valves being the most common issue, a valve not doing something. So what I'll start with is valves not doing things, and then if you guys can give me some suggestions as to why. Obviously some of you are going to know more. So if a valve doesn't open, so a valve being a solenoid valve, does anyone have any ideas why a solenoid valve wouldn't open? This is a solenoid valve. Yep, so power. So obviously it needs power to the coil to open. It could be not enough electricity, so obviously the voltage is low. It's going to be less likely to be that most people are putting the cable in properly. If it's an electricity issue, it's going to be the controller's off, the cable's broken, the wire joins haven't been done properly, it's screwed into the wrong hole, or there's deterioration of some capacity. So if you have that issue where there's not enough, the cable size might be right, but someone's nicked the plastic and it's started to deteriorate. And so when you get that corrosion in the cable, you're gonna have the same problem. If you have that situation, it's gonna be really hard for you to find it, because all you know is that at the controller, there's power, and at the valve, there's not. And there's 20 meters of cable and concrete and lawn to work through. If you get into that situation, this is probably the most important thing. When we're troubleshooting anything, you want to go with the easiest, most common, least amount of digging and cutting work to try and work out what's going on before you start digging things up and cutting coils off. So obviously, if it's an electricity issue, we're going to go to the controller and have a look at the controller and say, it's on, cool? Is there power coming out of the ports that the valve's meant to be running to? Now, if you don't have a multimeter, and I'd say it's probably a good idea to have one if you're going to be doing regular irrigation, you can do an ohms resistance test on the coil, as in with no power running through it, you put your things there and test the resistance. And if you get, I think Matt was saying yesterday, like a 20 or a 25, electricity is getting to the coil and back, so that's fine. What I used to do is I'd just get a spare coil and walk up to the controller while valve 1 was meant to be on, and I tap the coil. So a coil is this, and you'll get it, it'll click and buzz if it's getting the right amount of power. It's a bit of a bush mechanic kind of way to do it, but I'll just go like that, and then just test it, and you'll hear it buzzing. If you're getting power at the controller through that, but you're not getting it out at the valve, there's a cable issue, you could run a new length of cable out to the valve. We're trying to avoid cutting those cables and start playing with that, because once we've cut the cables, we've got to get new wire joiners, or we've got to replace stuff. But the first case would be to check the controller. Second would be to check the wire joins at the other end. Third would be to check the actual coil itself. So these are pretty good. They're an encapsulated coil. There's no exposed parts. You'd remember the Toro or the Rickdell 205 coils, the red cables. They've got they used to have a silver metal bit in the top of the coil, which would rust, and then the whole coil would actually rust out and it would stop working. They don't make them like that anymore, so it's not as common, but it could be the coil. What are we doing? Does not open. All right, so electricity being one. Anyone got any other ideas why a solenoid valve wouldn't open? You have to have an answer. Water, right? So the only two things that a valve needs to open are water and electricity. So the electricity lifts the pin, the water pushes it open. It could be something as simple as the ball valve's not on, right? So if the ball valve's off, there's no water, it won't pop up. It could be the solenoid valve is facing the wrong way. You done that before? I have. So it's not, don't feel bad. Have you done it? Yeah. They've got arrows on them, but you're busy. You're busy, you've got shit to do. You're trying to get the valves in. So if the valves are wrong, and I shit you not, working out that a valve's on backwards is the hardest troubleshoot you'll do, because you're just like, why isn't it working? And you're like checking everything. So yeah, it needs enough water to open. It needs to be facing the right way. It needs to have a ball valve open. You want to make sure that there's no blockages on that side of the valve. Obviously that side of the valve matters as well, because it needs that flow for it to open. Most commonly, if there's a flow issue, it's because there's something inside the valve. So there'll be a rock or something inside there. If you've installed the system yourself, obviously it wouldn't be a rock, because you guys are all so good at what you do. But if you're going out and like troubleshooting another person's work, all of these valves come apart the same way. You undo the screws on the top, you take the bonnet off, you're left with a diaphragm. Not all springs are captive like that, so be careful. The 205 is a good one. I don't know if you've ever replaced those. You open a 205, boing, spring's gone. That's the only thing that you'll replace. And when I say it's the only thing, 99% of the time it's a diaphragm. It's really, rarely ever a coil. So if you want to check for a blockage, you'll take that out, and it's just looking through here. That's when you'll open your valve. So you'll have your ball valve off to do this, open it back up and flush some water through it. If that's all clean, you put it all back together, it should be fine. So that's the water. Anything else you guys can think of that might stop a solenoid valve from opening? I'll give you this one because it could take a while. Debris. So it kind of crosses the water path.
It's debris, it's stuck on, not off.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's right. If there's debris affecting the coil from doing its job, so if you think about the hole that has to have the thing lift, if something's on there, it might not open. It's very unlikely that it's going to be debris, but it is something to look at. What I said yesterday with these guys is irrigation systems, it's like electricity and water. Irrigation and dirt don't work well together. Like irrigation goes on dirt, but dirt doesn't go in irrigation systems. It will stuff everything up. Diaphragms don't like it. MP rotators hate dirt. Like, I don't know if you've ever had an MP rotator with dirt in it, but I've not heard of any success stories from people flushing MP rotators or putting them in hydrochloric acid solutions or chlorine or whatever it might be. If an MP rotator gets dirt in it, you're pretty much throwing it out and putting a new one in. The R-vans are a little bit better. They've got a feature where you can hold them up and it flushes water through the nozzle. They're the ones I was talking about before. That could be a thing worth looking at. The unfortunate thing is, if you've designed a system at 11 mil and you want to retrofit nozzles at 15 mil and you don't have the flow, it's not going to work. So not opening is probably 30% of the time. Not closing is the main issue. A lot of times as well, a valve not opening won't be identified by your client until their whole garden's dead. This, you notice in about 2 or 3 hours. Now, any of those things relevant to that? Power? We'll come to that. So power is a yes. The only reason a solenoid valve won't turn off from a power standpoint, when I'm talking 24 volt AC, is because the controller is telling it to stay open. So that's a programming issue. It happens most often when someone has 4 programs and 4 start times, and then they set it and it's just running and running and running, and the client thinks that it shouldn't be on, but the controller's been told that it has to be on. So to troubleshoot that, if it's not turning off, you can turn the controller dial to off, or worst case, if the client is on the phone to you, flick the power at the switch to the controller. If the power at the switch goes off, the sprinklers pop down, you know that it's power. That will give you the ability to say to the client, look, is it really important that we fix it now? Obviously it's just watered. Can I come back when it's not midnight Sunday and we'll look at it? Now, debris, as you said, is probably, aside from damage, debris would be the most common. The amount of times I've found, it's usually the last valve on the manifold, like a 7 mil white aggregate stone somehow is in the last valve, and it sits under the diaphragm because it comes in on top of the diaphragm, I think, actually. And so the way these diaphragms push up and down to open and close, and the rock won't let it stop, won't let it close. When that happens, you find that it's not a case that the water's coming out at the same flow. It might just be that the last sprinkler is just leaking. Obviously, it's going to leak for 10 minutes or 4 minutes from a check valve. It's going to keep leaking forever if there's a rock in the valve. Same situation if you'll take it apart, you'll check that there's no rock in there. While you're looking for that rock, you check the integrity of the diaphragm. These are all different. Every diaphragm looks similar, but they're all different. If there's a problem with a diaphragm, you're going to see it. They're consistent around the whole diaphragm. If there's a split or a crack or damage from any stones, you'll pick it up straight away. We generally don't sell these as a spare part on their own because that plus that sold separately equals to that. So what we try to do is encourage people to buy a solenoid valve, take it apart themselves, fix the diaphragm, keep that, and they've got 2 spare parts. The problem that occurs in that situation is that you're replacing, what did I say before? 80, 90% of a solenoid valve's problem is a diaphragm, and then 10 or 20% is a coil. Okay, where's my phone?
Kate's got it.
All right, cool. See ya. Debris, damage. It's, I don't know, I haven't worked on site for a long time. Are you seeing damaged valve diaphragms? No, it's not a thing. Like if the valve, if there's not, you'd be looking at 20 to 25-year-old Rickdell valves that have just been operating for so long that they've deteriorated. They're always lubricated. They're a plastic or a rubber, so there's nothing much that can go wrong with them. So it's very uncommon that it's not closing because it's torn, but it's something worth knowing. What else is there? And I'm asking genuinely, I can't think of anything else. Valve won't close, debris. So there can be debris in the actual valve and there can be debris under the coil. So these coils are pretty good. They've got a large, I guess, foot, which is filtered. If you look at the Rickdell coils, I keep saying the Rickdell coils, I should have probably had one here. They're tiny. If any amount of dirt gets in there, it's going to cause potentially it not to close. There's another part of this valve called a bleed screw. Most of the solenoid valves that you work with will have a bleed screw. It's that screw there. If you unscrew that about a quarter to a half turn, the valve will turn on. So the whole principle of a valve is the pressure changes from a release at the top and the valve opens. Electronically, that's lifting a pin. Manually, by turning a coil like a quarter turn, you simulate that pin lifting electronically, it opens. Further manually, you open this bleed screw, it does the same thing. Now, if you lose that bleed screw, or it's thread, because the threads are tiny, like if you damage the thread of that bleed screw and it doesn't go back in, or you lose it, what will happen is you'll find water just squirting out. That's a really bad design. There we go. All right, yeah, so that there, water squirts out that. The bleed screw does exactly what it's designed to do. It will bleed the top of the valve. That will help clean out any debris that might be above the valve. So that could be something that you could do as a test when you're trying to work out what's going on. What else is there? Valve won't close. That's pretty much it. Now, electronically with these, as soon as the power gets cut to a solenoid valve, it will close because the whole operating of it is that the electricity is lifting that pin and dropping it so regularly using alternating current that it holds it up. Hunter nodes, which I'll use as the generic term for a battery operated controller, work completely differently. They're a latching coil. They send a 9-volt pulse to the coil, lift the coil, magnetically hold it open, and then they send a pulse to tell it to close. That's the way that a 9-volt battery can last 2 years in the ground opening a valve. You could imagine how much power it would take if it was continuously sending a pulse. Theoretically, you could have a Hunter node not close because the battery went flat after it turned on, and then it doesn't turn off. The chances of that happening would be probably higher than you winning that bloody house at Henley Beach, or lower. Anyway, you get the point. If a battery operated valve is not shutting off, it's very unlikely that it's because of the electricity not turning it off, and you would start referring to all of these other things. The valve body itself in those situations, so a Hunter node has a standard Hunter solenoid valve with a different coil. A Rainbird DVF with a WPX has the same solenoid valve with a different coil. So all of the troubleshooting that you would do for the actual hydraulic side of it, so if there's not enough water or there's debris, is all the same. The electronics is slightly, or the electrics is slightly different. And so it's just important for you to know the difference. What else can happen with a solenoid valve? So the only other two things that you might find with a valve is that it's chattering, or that it's vibrating. You can use the flow control to adjust the amount of water that's coming through. You might be getting water hammer through the valve. That top thing there is the flow control. It's not something that most people touch. You can't adjust the amount of pressure that comes through a valve using the flow control, but you can push down on it and it might fix the hammer. I wouldn't be playing with it too much. Any other things you guys can think of? I think that's it. It's really not opening or not closing. Not getting enough water. That's probably the last one. So the flow control, we talked about it yesterday. Sometimes you'll find that you'll buy a valve off the shelf and the person that's worked in the shop has been standing there talking to someone and they're just playing with this and they've turned that down. So that there, what I'm screwing down now is the flow control. it pushes down on the diaphragm using, I broke this one yesterday actually, so I don't know where the rest of it is. But it pushes down and it won't let, so the diaphragm opens, but it's like it pops up a half, so it won't let all the water out. If you've had a system designed off of a flow test and the sprinklers aren't popping up, it could be because someone's played with that flow control, so go out there and check that. That's something that's really easy to do. Anti-clockwise brings it all the way up and it stops it pushing on the diaphragm. You can do that without having to get any tools out, you're not cutting anything open. So that would be the first thing I'd look at if you're not getting enough flow before you start opening the valve. What have we got? Diaphragm, controller. All right, I'm going to talk about sprinklers next. So what have you guys got happening in the world of sprinklers that might be an issue? Take turns, one at a time. Sprinklers. I'll go first. Not popping up. So, obviously we talked a bit about it before. What would cause a sprinkler system not to pop up? Water? Yep. So, there's a few ways that there could be water issues. One is that the system's been designed badly and that there's too many sprinklers on the system. So we had a job recently through Facebook. We're part of a lot of online communities, and we get a lot of irrigation designs come through our website, and then we do the design and we send them the quote, and then they buy the stuff, we send them the stuff. We had a system where the guy's flow test came back at 30 litres a minute. His system was designed at 18. We sent him the system, he put it in and it wouldn't pop up. And sadly, a lot of the time, the retail outlet that you deal with are going to assume that they're right and the client's wrong. And my guys straight away were like, no, he must have done something wrong. He hasn't put it in, or he hasn't done the flow test right, or he hasn't done this. And the only thing that I could think of at the time is that we got him to test the system directly off the tap rather than through a hose or through a tap timer. So when you run water through a garden hose, it's going to lose flow and pressure. And if you run it through a tap timer, we discovered it loses a lot of pressure. So we did a video about this and put it on our YouTube channel. We put I reckon it was an Orbit Beehive tap timer, and it took that 30 litres a minute of flow to 20 litres a minute just from passing through the tap timer. So we tested that at our Kent Town location with a few different timers. The Hunter Bluetooth tap timer was almost the same. So they're shaving 10 litres. I don't think they shaved 33%. I think it was just a case that 30 went to 20. I think that 40 might have gone to 20. So what we ended up having to do is to give him another time. So we did this, we gave him a free timer and gave him everything he needed. We treated it as a learning experience. My guys now know not to design out to pass 20 litres a minute off of a tap timer. The funny thing is, you guys would have heard, I said it was designed at 18 litres a minute. Now, theoretically, 18 litres a minute, if there's 20 litres a minute, should work. The problem is with sprinkler systems, the initial startup requires more water than the operating thing. So if you go out with a situation like that, you'll pull the sprinklers up, you'll actually get them to come up and they'll stay up. There's a thing called flow by where the sprinkler shaft is tapered. So water flushes out between the O-ring of the sprinkler and the sides of the shaft to clean any debris out. And when the sprinkler gets to its full pop-up height, that taper is like at its widest and it seals off on the seal, and then you've got the right flow. So when we're designing those systems, we try to design them to about 80% of the required flow. So if we designed that at 16 litres a minute or 15 litres a minute with his 20, he would have been fine. Another reason you might have no flow is a damaged pipe leading to the sprinkler. Obviously there's not enough water getting to the sprinkler. In those cases, you'll generally see like bubbling underground, or there's water squirting out somewhere, or there's a puddle somewhere. Or you won't, and you'll have to listen for it. I don't know if you've ever had this, but you'll find a drain in the backyard and there's just water pouring into it and you can hear the water. If there's good drainage, you won't find the leak without listening for it because it's going away. What else? Sprinkler pop-ups. Won't pop up. Ball valve is off. valve is off. A valve being off won't pop a sprinkler up. What else is there? I think that's about it. Obviously you could get debris in sprinklers. They're likely to still pop up. They're just not going to do anything, which really moves me into the next one. Sprinklers not rotating. So MP rotators, we've talked about that so many times already today. If they're dirty, they're not going to turn. It's not likely that too much pressure is going to stop a rotator from turning, but not enough pressure might stop a rotator from turning. It's probably not going to pop up to get to that point anyway. Gear drives, generally, if they stop turning, they're broken and they're not repairable, and that's a warranty situation. On warranty, it's something I talked about with the guys yesterday, so I'll cover it off today. If you have a warranty on any of the products that we sell, bar none, my team have full authority from the manufacturers and from me to authorize a warranty at the counter. So if you come in with a product and it's broken and we test it and we discover that it's within the time frame of warranty, we are allowed to give you the new product, a replacement product. I don't think there might be some Grundfos pumps that have to get sent back. I think if you're starting to deal with $10,000 and $15,000 pumps, they'd like to have a look at it to see if it's a $10 repair rather than a new pump. The idea, well, my theory around warranty from a tradesperson's standpoint is to try and choose the best quality products that you can, find the ranges that you're most comfortable with. Obviously, products like Rainbird and Hunter and Toro and NetFM are in that place, because you're never going to get your time covered by a manufacturer that you lose with warranty situations. And I said it yesterday, there's been there's been a number of people that have come in, all guns are blazing, I'm going to sue Rainbird, they're paying for my new house, because their valve leaked and it flooded their backyard. The reality is they're not going to, they never have. I've only ever had one situation where a manufacturer has come to the party for a warranty, and it wasn't so much, it was drip tube with no holes. So they had a drip tube that had all the drippers put into the pipe and there was no holes. So it was like poly pipe that just had drippers living inside it. They ended up giving them enough money to fix the system. They acknowledged that it was a subsurface system and it was pretty unreasonable. But the reality is you're going to have an element of fault. If you're worried about warranty, don't use tap timers. Just put proper irrigation systems in. The return rate of tap timers is ridiculous. No one makes a bullet. I mean, to be honest, Gardenia make a really good 2-hour dial timer for $22 or $26. They're pretty good. If you do choose to go down the tap timer path, try to choose ones that have 1,000 kPa pressure rating. I think most of them now are pretty good. I know in the past we've had kind of 690 kPa. If you're going to stick a 690 kPa pressure rated tap timer in a house, even with a 500 kPa pressure reducer, when that turns off, it's going to spike. You want to put a pressure reducer above the timer. The pressure reducers that we sell for after a solenoid valve are not rated for static and continuous pressure, so you need to buy a different pressure reducer because they will blow if they're under continuous pressure. Sprinkler's not turning. That's probably it. Anything else you guys can think of that you have issues with sprinklers? Like if you were going out to a site and the customer rang you and my sprinkler is not doing this or my sprinkler is doing this? No. The funny one we've had is my sprinklers are just spraying straight in the air. Generally that's because they haven't replaced the flushing nozzles with sprinkler heads. Obviously it's unlikely to happen at trade level, but retail clients, if they're not explained clearly that the MP rotator has to be actually fitted to the body and you take the flushing nozzle off, they've just got these kind of geysers everywhere. So that's probably it with sprinklers. I'll move on to controllers. This is really dirty. This is not going to work very well. Probably should have just written over the top of it, eh? They left me nice whiteboards, but they didn't leave me a clean thing. So, what have you guys had controller-wise that's an issue? If it's nothing, it's cool. We've got half an hour left and we can just have some beers, but...
Wiring it up.
Hmm?
Wiring it up.
Wiring it up. So, what would be the issue for you wiring it up? Like, as in how to wire it up?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll talk quickly about that. For me, I always had a system of wiring of alphabetical order cable. You obviously want to make sure that you've got a nice wire stripper to make sure your wires are clean, and that you have obviously enough cables to do the valves. And I think I'm answering your question. If I'm not, tell me. When I used to install, obviously you've got an 8-station controller, you need 9-core cable for an 8-station controller because you need a cable for each of your actives and one for your common. I would always use a black for my common. I'm guessing most of you do, whether or not it's accidentally or you don't even know why. It's kind of this unwritten rule in Australia. I think in the US a lot of times it's white. That makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. So we have the black for the common, and then I used to work alphabetically through blue, brown, and then all the other colors that obviously go alphabetically. Then you go out to your solenoid valves, do the same. So valve 1, valve 2, valve 3, valve 4. Make sure you're using high quality wire joins. You don't need to solder, but you want to have a gel filled connector. As I said before, electricity and water don't mix. You want to make sure that none of the copper in the ground is exposed to any water at all. So you make sure you do that. If you've done all that, it should just work. If you have issues with it not sending a signal, there's either a problem with the controller or a problem with your wire. You've done your wiring properly, so there might be a problem with your joins. I have found with the big, the blue and white 314s that you crush. So with those, they're a large wire joiner. So if you're using them with the 1/2 mil cable, which is the traditional size cable that you use for residential properties, as we've seen on there, with a cable like this, the actual wall thickness of these wires that come on the valves is thicker than the cable that you're putting them with. Those wire joiners are designed to be able to just stick the wire in and crush, and it actually has like a blade that goes down around the cable and pierces into the plastic and touches the metal. With the really small wires, it doesn't always do that. So if you're finding that you're not getting it to work, if I was doing it with those wire joiners, I'd actually sheath the cable back, twist them together, stick them into the wire joiner and crush it. Not how they're designed to be used, but if you're using different diameter cable sheaths, one of them will kind of work because it's bigger and it catches it, but the other one's kind of just sitting underneath it, almost getting shadowed, and it doesn't pierce it, so it doesn't touch. So that would probably be it. If you want to go like deep into it, solder them together, heat shrink them, and no one does that though. So yeah. Other issues with controllers, obviously Wi-Fi controllers nowadays are more common. That's something that we're seeing.
Does Wi-Fi get better with them? Because I've got one in the shed that works once.
So from what my basic knowledge from speaking to customers is that Hunter Hydro Wires have probably the best Wi-Fi signal controller available. The Rainbird one, we've had more issues with connectivity. Matt yesterday recommended to people that if you're going to put a Wi-Fi controller in your house, obviously the first thing you want to do is make sure that you've got signal where it's going. You can use your phone to try and see how many bars you're getting out there. You would do a Wi-Fi test now when you do a water flow test so that you've got all that ready to go. Program the controller in your house close to your router in a wall and make sure that it's working, so that if you do take it out into a shed and plug it into the wall and it doesn't work, you know that it's not the controller and it's not you. It's just too far away. There's Wi-Fi and there's Wi-Fi as much as there's Bluetooth and there's Bluetooth. You look at the Bluetooth timers that we have these days, there's Bluetooth 4, Bluetooth 4.1, Bluetooth 4.4, and these are all new advancements in Bluetooth that will work from a further distance, but then obviously have higher electrical demand, so then your battery life's shorter. So the manufacturers are obviously trying to choose something that ticks that kind of, I guess, the parabola, like it's like the furthest distance they can go without wasting battery. From a Wi-Fi standpoint, I don't think it's getting any better. Like, I think that you need to really be within whatever that range is, 15 meters for a couple of double brick walls is starting to be a problem. All you could do is have a booster or try to hook up a 4G. But yeah, in answer to your question, I don't think it's getting any better. One of the biggest, the most common phone call we're getting around controllers now is my Wi-Fi is not connecting, or I'm having trouble with my Wi-Fi. all we recommend, and it sounds stupid, is to reset the controller, which is the same answer you're going to get from any IT person. Have you tried resetting the controller? Yes. All right, now go through all that process, like one step at a time. Don't skip steps. I'm super guilty of it. Every unboxing I've ever done on YouTube, I just go like that with the instructions and try and play with it, and then I get a phone call from Hunter. This has literally happened. We did an unboxing of a Hunter product. What was it, a Bluetooth? No, the Hunter Node or something. And I was like, this is shit. Like, this is such a piece of shit, and I was throwing stuff around. I couldn't get it to connect. We ended up stopping filming because it took an hour and 20 minutes, and I was like, I'm done. I got a phone call from Hunter US. Can you take that video down? No. And then, all right, would you mind doing another video with our product manager? Following the instructions, guess what, Clint? It works. So if you go through, if you're having issues, they recommend to go through that process and do it properly. But I had something flash into my head about controllers while I was talking and I forgot. Wi-Fi, tap timers. What else can happen with a controller? Yeah, so modules. All right, so a lot of controllers come with modular expansion, and sometimes you'll have a situation where you put a new module into the controller but the module doesn't work. It's recommended by all manufacturers that when you install another module for more stations, that you give the controller a hard reset and program it from scratch. The controller won't necessarily understand that it's received that module until it's been reset. I don't know what process it does inside its computer where it goes, oh, okay, new software, new hardware, and it understands it. But if you're having trouble with a controller module, it might not even be that module that's not working. You might put a new module in and the whole thing stops, or the power module stops. Every time you have an issue with your controller, before doing anything else, reset the controller and start from scratch. I know it's like, it sounds like a computer thing. They are computers. It will quite often fix the problem. Controllers, what else we got? I think that's really it. What did we have yesterday? A guy lost a station, right? So he had an 8-station controller. I don't know what number it was, but station 7 just doesn't work. Put any wire in there, it doesn't work. If that's happening, it's a warranty. If the controller's within its warranty period, obviously it sucks. You've got to take the controller off the wall, bring it back to wherever you bought it from, get a new controller, take it back out. The idea, and I started talking about warranty before with manufacturers not covering your time. The idea, this is my idea, my understanding behind tradespeople getting trade pricing and retail people getting retail pricing, is that there's enough margin on your materials over the period of your business that you are in front after going to a shop, sitting behind a counter, buying shit, putting it in your ute, going and installing it, coming back 1 in 100 times to replace the controller. All that time, in my opinion, is the margin between trade and retail. That's why it's there. So that's when we get people come back and go, look, someone's got to cover my time. We're like, well, that's your responsibility. And it's a bit of a hard line, but I'll go into bat for any one of you guys if there's a genuine problem. The manufacturers have made it clear for decades that they will never cover your time. And I guess most of you get that. Like, it sucks, but that's the reality of it. So, any other controller issues? One thing to make sure, outdoor controllers, leave your doors closed. We get sometimes they come back and the whole inside of the controller is brown. And they're like, I don't know why, man. Like, we keep it closed. Like, the brown's from the sun. So no, you don't. And it's not going to go through. I would also suggest don't worry about buying indoor controllers anymore. The price difference between indoor and outdoor is not there anymore. One of the advantages of buying outdoor controllers over indoor controllers is that you can have, even if it's indoors, bugs can't get into the controller, and sure, it looks neater. You've got an internal transformer, all that jazz. Has anyone else got any other issues that they want me to address around anything? Clamps not fitting, sprinklers squealing, I don't know, like nothing? That was easy. All right, well, that's it. I'm here for at least another hour, so if anyone's got specific things they want to talk about, you can come up to me. If you want to have a look around the shop, you're welcome to go anywhere. This is obviously not finished yet, but when it is, I think we'll be one of the largest irrigation stores in the state, if not the country. My plan is to have enough capacity to be able to handle any size commercial project almost out of the warehouse. Obviously not any size, there's some pretty big jobs at the moment that we've had to pull in for, but I didn't touch on it properly at the start, but I am Clint Adams, if you haven't worked that out already. These are all the socials for all of the businesses that we operate. Waterpro, Lawn Hub and Railways are all my companies. We're pretty active on every social platform except TikTok at the moment, but we'll be moving into that when I can get my head around it. And not get my head around doing it, but trying to fit another social platform into my day. So the guys, obviously, if you're not sure yet, our team offer free irrigation designs for residential systems. Obviously, commercial systems are different, and we have a very strong culture of support and education. So we would like to do these series of education all the time. It's good for my YouTube anyway because it gives me more content, and I'm happy to help educate you guys. As I said at the start, this is on YouTube, so if anyone's got any concerns about the back of their head being on YouTube, please tell me now and he can pixelate you out. Short of that, I know how busy you guys are at the moment, so I appreciate you coming and actually doing this, and I'll make sure that Lisa keeps you across as we do more. Yesterday, I came up with the idea of doing a controller session, so we're looking to do something where we have an Orbit beehive, a Hunter Hydra wires, and a Rainbird ESP ME all mounted to a wall, and I'll go through programming start to finish and all the features that one does and one doesn't. I just need to work out, Duffy's going to work out how to have a camera on that so that we can run it on a 50-inch or a 60-inch so you guys can see what I'm doing from where you're sitting and then get more interactive. So that is that. Thanks for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.